You're sitting at a dinner table. The conversation flows like lukewarm soup, tepid, recycled, predictable. Someone makes a joke that's not funny, but everyone laughs. You don't. Your silence is the loudest thing in the room. Eyes glance, forks pause, and just like that, you've marked yourself as different. It always starts like this, quiet, subtle. The moment you step away from the herd, it doesn't feel heroic. It feels awkward. You weren't trying to rebel. You just wanted to speak honestly, or maybe not speak at all. But you violated the one unwritten rule of all group dynamics. Do not disturb the illusion of agreement. From that moment, something shifts. You don't even notice it at first. Maybe someone doesn't invite you next time. Maybe there's a chuckle when you leave the room, or a quiet question whispered at a side table. What's going on with them lately? You've done nothing wrong. In fact, you've done something right. You've listened to yourself. But that's precisely the problem. You see, societies don't hate the wicked. They hate the free. Freedom threatens order, and order loves to be worshipped. So, what happens in tonight's video? We walk together through what follows when you dare to rise. Ridicule, resistance, moral traps, and the quiet, bitter beauty of standing tall when it's easier to kneel. You probably won't survive this socially, at least not without scars. But you will feel more awake, more human, and, strangely, more at peace than those still busy pleasing the ghost of someone else's approval. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a step back from the group. That's all it takes. You no longer nod when they expect it. You don't laugh to keep peace. You don't flatter people just because they outrank you in imaginary hierarchies. You're not trying to make a scene. You're just honest, present, real. It's not arrogance. It's clarity. And clarity scares people. Do you know what happens to a person who stops performing? They break the mirror. And everyone else who's still performing sees their own reflection crack. That's why they react. It's not you. It's what you represent. You're the reminder they could have chosen differently. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." That wasn't metaphor. It was warning. History supports this. Take Socrates. He didn't lead an army. He didn't build an empire. He just asked questions no one wanted to answer. So they poisoned him. The official term was corrupting the youth, but the real crime was teaching them to think. Historians still argue whether Socrates was truly dangerous or just annoying. But that's the point. In a society addicted to comfort and routine, truth becomes the most unforgivable offense. A quirky detail? In ancient Athens, jurors were paid to attend trials, including the one that sentenced Socrates. Imagine that. Being financially rewarded to vote against the one person trying to wake everyone up. Modern society isn't so dramatic. No hemlock, no public trials. But the punishment is just as effective. Social isolation, mockery, invisibility. You'll notice it when your phone stops buzzing, when people forget to tag you, when your ideas are suddenly too much or too negative. You might even laugh at yourself and wonder, am I just overthinking? But you're not. You're just waking up, and waking up is rarely applauded. But here's the thing. The discomfort you feel is not a sign of failure. It's a sign of crossing thresholds most never approach. You are exiting the village of consensus, and that village will try to pull you back, not out of malice, but fear. They fear what you now see. You've just entered the first phase, the quiet recoil. It's the breath society takes before deciding what to do with someone who no longer plays the game. And you? You take one more step away. Ridicule is elegant in its cruelty. It doesn't scream, it doesn't strike, it smirks. You wake up one morning and notice your name has become a punchline in a conversation you weren't invited to. Not cruel, exactly, just dismissive. A raised eyebrow here, a sarcastic, well, someone thinks they're special there. The moment you rise, society doesn't confront you. It giggles. This is the first true weapon used to punish deviation, mockery. Not because it hurts you directly, but because it makes others afraid to stand beside you. You may think it's harmless, just words. But ridicule is a scalpel society uses to cut the courageous from the herd. If exile is the bullet, ridicule is the silencer. And it works. It always has. Take Giordano Bruno, a 16th century thinker who proposed that stars were distant suns with their own planets. Today, that sounds poetic. Back then, it was considered absurd, dangerous. The Inquisition didn't just argue with him, they laughed. They staged elaborate mock trials, made a public show of his insanity. Then, once the audience was entertained and comforted by their own correctness, they burned him alive. Historians still argue whether Bruno was executed for heresy or arrogance, but we know this. Before society kills an idea, it first makes it ridiculous. Modern equivalents? Think of whistleblowers labeled as crazy, activists dismissed as angry, or anyone pursuing a non-traditional life path being called lost or delusional. The content is new, but the pattern is ancient. There's a fringe case from early 20th century Vienna, a minor civil servant who left his post to become a full-time composer of waltzes. His peers mocked him endlessly until his music began to be played in salons, and suddenly everyone pretended to have always believed in him. But they hadn't. They just feared being left behind. Because that's the real threat of the one who rises. They become a mirror to everyone else's passivity. And that reflection is unbearable. So instead, society throws stones dipped in laughter. You've changed. Oh, you're too intense. Why can't you just chill? These phrases are not questions. They are commands to return to the comfort of conformity. And you'll feel the pressure, even if you don't want to. Because human beings are biologically wired to avoid social rejection. In ancient times, exile meant death. We carry that fear in our bones. It's not about ego. It's survival instinct. When someone mocks you, your nervous system tightens, your stomach clenches, and your brain whispers, maybe they're right. They aren't. But you'll still doubt yourself. And that's the genius of ridicule. It makes you self-police before they have to. Nietzsche understood this well. He called society's morality a herd instinct in the individual. To mock someone who rises is to bring them back to grazing position, where they're safe, predictable, and blandly digestible. And you start to notice something peculiar. The more clarity you gain, the funnier you become to others. Not because you're absurd, but because their nervous systems are defending their reality by belittling yours. The best thinkers in history were not taken seriously in their time. Some of them weren't even hated, just laughed at. Kafka, Van Gogh, Schopenhauer, misfits to the point of tragedy, because ridicule didn't only come from strangers, it came from lovers, family, friends, and so it will for you. You'll share your thoughts with someone close. They'll smile, condescend, or offer the deadliest response of all, a well-meaning shrug, and it will sting. Not because you need validation, but because part of you still believes in the myth that honesty earns love. It doesn't. Honesty earns distance, and then, if you survive that distance, it earns truth. But let's not jump ahead. You're still in the early days. You're learning the terrain of being the outsider. And society is sharpening its next blade. You think ridicule was sharp? Wait until we reach silence. Silence isn't golden. It's leaden, heavy, crushing. After the laughter dies down, after the ridicule no longer stings or perhaps no longer works, something colder arrives. Indifference. Not the kind that leaves you alone, but the kind that leaves you unseen. You speak, and your voice floats like fog over a quiet lake, never landing anywhere, never stirring anything. Now, you've become something worse than laughable. You've become inconvenient. It starts in small ways. Fewer invitations, less eye contact. People scroll past your posts without engagement. In conversations, they change the subject when you speak, not out of cruelty, but discomfort. Because you are the reminder they don't want. You've begun the lonely climb, not because you're better than others, not because you're self-important, but because you're carrying a thought no one else is brave enough to hold. A vision too vivid for those with dimmed eyes. And so, the world retreats. It happened to Nietzsche himself. As his ideas grew bolder, his audience grew thinner. His books didn't sell. His letters went unanswered. His name became a ghost in academic circles. One historian later remarked that Nietzsche was less read in his lifetime than any of the thinkers he criticized. And yet, he kept writing, because by then, he'd understood. The climb isn't meant to be shared. It's not a group hike. It's an ascent. You feel this now. The higher you go, the quieter it gets. You used to share your thoughts and get nods. Now you get furrowed brows, or worse, no reaction at all. You begin to doubt your own mind, not because it's wrong, but because no one is there to reflect it back. This is the cost of clarity. Historians still argue whether the greatest breakthroughs in human history were born from loneliness or in spite of it. But one thing is certain. Almost none of them happened in crowded rooms. Think of the mystic in a cave, the artist in her cold attic, the inventor tinkering in obscurity, the philosopher walking alone in the forest, muttering to ghosts. That's you now. The fringe tidbit, there's an obscure 14th century Japanese monk named Kenko, who after losing his patronage, retired to a tiny hut and wrote essays no one read. They were scribbled on scraps of paper and glued to walls. Centuries later, they became one of Japan's literary treasures. But Kenko didn't know that. He wrote into a void. So do you. The climb teaches you something vital. Validation is a luxury, not a necessity. You stop asking for applause. You stop sharing your drafts. You even stop correcting those who misunderstand you. You are becoming ungovernable. This is the moment society worries most, because you no longer fear their silence. You no longer depend on their noise. And that's dangerous, because people who don't crave belonging are impossible to control. So, the system tries something else. It offers you a rope. Come back, it says. We were only joking. Just don't go too far. But you know better. You know this isn't an invitation. It's a leash. And so, you keep climbing. Each step costs you a friend, a habit, a belief. And at some point, high above the village of comfort, you pause and realize there's no one here to admire the view. No cameras, No cheering, just wind and rock. And strangely, it feels honest. For the first time, you're not living for reaction. You're living for truth. And that's when the final punishment begins. Not mockery, not silence, but a subtler, more insidious attack. Morality. The climb has made you free. So now, they will try to make you guilty. You're still climbing, but now the path gets murky. Not because the stones beneath you shift, but because the voices you left behind have taken on a new tone. They're no longer mocking. They're concerned. They say things like, "Who do you think you are? You've changed. You're being selfish." Not in anger, but in disappointment. A carefully wrapped guilt bomb, hidden in the soft velvet of love and virtue. Because now that laughter and silence have failed, the next weapon society draws is morality. But not the kind that helps, heals, or uplifts. Number this is the morality of compliance, forged not in truth, but in convenience. The system doesn't need you to be evil to punish you. It only needs you to disobey. Let's go back in time. Socrates, remember him? The father of Western philosophy, sentenced to death for corrupting the youth and impiety. But what was his true crime? Asking questions, daring to think outside the accepted frameworks. Historians still argue whether Socrates was truly a threat to Athenian democracy, or whether the real threat was how he made people feel about their own ignorance. That's what you do now. By being yourself unapologetically, you've become a mirror, not a flattering one, a sharp, unpolished one that shows every crack in others' comfort zones. And mirrors, especially the honest ones, are rarely loved. The quirky fact, in medieval England, there was a time when left-handed people were accused of being in league with the devil, their only sin, doing things differently. So don't be surprised when your differences are no longer dismissed as quirks, but rebranded as moral failings. You'll be called arrogant, too ambitious, uncaring, disloyal. Each accusation carefully crafted not to destroy your work, but your image, especially in your own eyes. Because society doesn't just want to stop you. It wants to make you stop yourself. It wants to tame you with shame. You may find yourself apologizing for things you didn't do, softening your voice, hiding your strength, masking your insight in self-deprecation. Why? So others don't feel bad. But here's Nietzsche whispering from the void. They muddy the water to make it seem deep. You're not the villain. You're the uncomfortable truth in a room full of lies told politely. You are what Nietzsche called the Übermensch in his early conception. Not a superhero, but a person who creates values from within, rather than borrowing from decaying norms. The world fears that, not because it's wrong, but because it threatens the shared hallucination of morality as obedience. You start to notice how often virtue is just a mask, how often humble is code for silent, how often team player means don't question the leader. This is the phase where the spiritual attack begins. You are offered every reason to shrink yourself. Think of your family. Don't rock the boat. It's not the right time. You begin to doubt again, but this time it's more dangerous, because now the doubt wears the clothing of duty. You look around and see successful people who didn't climb. They were lifted, not because they dared more, but because they obeyed better. And you wonder, was I wrong to resist? But that's the trick. They want you to measure yourself by the same rulers you once snapped in half. They want you to use their words, success, community, honor, without asking who defined them. So here's your reminder. The one who rises must become his own judge, not to be flawless, but to be free. And that's why morality, when wielded by the herd, is not a compass. It's a leash, designed to look like guidance, wrapped in the language of kindness. But when you pull away, it tightens. And you're starting to realize something radical. You don't need their permission. You can rise without guilt. You can shine without apology. You can exist without explanation. But you have to choose it every single day, because they will keep offering you a seat at the table as long as you never stand up on it. And now you've reached a place most never do. You're standing alone, not on a mountaintop, not in the clouds, not bathed in applause, just outside the gates of normalcy, outside the rituals of acceptable thought, outside the warm campfire where the herd huddles for safety. This is the part no one shows on the posters. Rising doesn't always feel like flying. It feels like aching feet, like cold mornings, like wondering if the silence around you is freedom or exile. And yet, you don't stop. You keep walking, because somewhere along the way, you discovered the great heresy of our time. It's better to walk alone in truth than be loved in illusion. It's a funny thing, though. You don't rise because you hate them. You rise because you love them enough not to lie to them or to yourself. You tried to bring them with you. You shared what you saw. You whispered your early insights with gentleness. But they didn't want to hear. They didn't want to leave the cave. Remember Plato's allegory? A group of people chained in a cave, watching shadows on a wall. One escapes, sees the light, comes back to free the others, and they try to kill him. Historians still argue whether Plato meant it literally or metaphorically, but either way, the lesson holds. Most people don't want truth. They want comfort. They want someone to tell them the darkness they know is all there is. And when you don't, when you say there's more, when you become more, they don't celebrate. They call you dangerous, not because you hurt them, but because your very being questions their smallness. That's the final punishment. Not mockery, not isolation, not moral shaming. It's misunderstanding. They do not see you clearly. They reduce you to headlines. They flatten you into a meme. They reinterpret your intention as arrogance, your boundaries as cruelty, your evolution as betrayal, because to truly see you would require that they change. And few things terrify the average person more than change that wasn't their idea. And yet, here you are, still rising, not because you believe you'll win, not because you want to prove them wrong, not even because you know where you're going. You rise because you must, because the alternative, the life you had before, now feels like a coffin with better lighting. You've come too far to crawl back. And this is freedom, not applause, not validation, not even peace, but the ability to look in the mirror and say, I did not betray myself. Napoleon once said, if you want a thing done well, do it yourself. But he also died alone, exiled on an island, scribbling dreams no one wanted to hear anymore. Nietzsche, too, died misunderstood, declared mad, abandoned, feared. But his words lit fires that still burn in minds, unafraid of the dark. So here you are, in good company, the punished, the exiled, the seen too late. And strangely, you smile, not out of pride, not out of revenge, but because you finally understand the punishment was proof. Proof you left the cave, proof you stopped crawling, proof that maybe, just maybe, you're not the mad one. You were simply the first to stand. And in a world that kneels by default. Standing is the most radical thing you can do.